Hello. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the different development approaches you can take when working with XM Cloud. We're going to take a look at Docker-based development and front-end first development. So, let's get started. So, XM Cloud is a headless platform, and that means in your application, your front-end code that you write yourself and the back-end code that's provided by the XM Cloud SaaS platform is actually separate. And this means you can actually build your head in any of the technologies you like. And this means it's a really powerful model, as it means you can choose the best technology for your implementation. And you can even mix and match. So you can use different technologies for different sites or within the same project, if that's what works for your scenario. What I want to cover in this video though, is the different development methods you can choose when you're building against a headless platform like this. First up is Docker-based development. When we launched XM Cloud a few years back, this was the sole way we were telling people to build XM Cloud applications. When working this way, you mock a small subset of the XM Cloud SaaS applications, running them locally on your developer machine. But we quickly saw a few drawbacks with this approach though. First, while you can mock some of the applications, it's not possible for all of them. So you didn't have access to things like pages, forms, or components. Next, because the CM image is based on .NET Framework, it means you needed to run Windows-based containers, and that introduced a requirement for a Windows-based development machine, so you couldn't run on things like macOS or Linux. The number of containers you needed to run as well also meant you needed a fairly high-spec machine to be able to have all those containers running simultaneously and still have a productive developer experience. Docker itself, when working with Windows containers, and this many of them as well, could also be slow to bring them all up. So developers could be waiting sometimes several minutes to get their dev environment ready for them to be able to actually work against. Finally, it didn't actually support full offline development either. You still needed an internet connection to be able to authenticate with the portal, which you needed to be able to access the CM running locally to do content management activities, or to use the CLI to serialize data in and out of the content tree. Based on these drawbacks, we recently changed the default development experience for XM Cloud to a new approach we're calling front-end development first, or Fed first as we usually refer to it. Now, before I show it in action, I do want to call out that the Docker-based development flow we're looking at here is still a perfectly valid approach. If you have a team who's productive working this way, we're not forcing them to move over to the new way of working. This change also isn't an all or nothing approach. You may very well end up with team members working some in Docker, some Fed first, and that's perfectly fine. We want developers to work in the way that they're most productive. We're fairly sure though that once most people try the new Fed first approach, they're going to be really happy with the benefits that it provides. So let's take a look at how it's different first. Okay, so the first major change here when working Fed first is that all you're doing is running the head applications locally directly on your developer machine. So no containers involved anymore. No more mocked application instances, just the heads running locally, connecting through to the preview endpoint of your XM Cloud environment. And this has some big benefits when compared to mocking all those application instances in locally running Docker containers. Firstly, you get complete access to all of the XM Cloud backend applications. So things like pages, forms, components, they can all be leveraged directly running against your locally running developer instance of your site. Next, as we're no longer running in Windows containers, this has removed the requirements for a Windows machine. So you can now build this way using Windows, of course, but also macOS or Linux. Again, enabling developers to work in the way they're most productive. This also means the footprint of applications running on the developer's machine is much smaller. So that means you can use a lighter spec machine and still be productive building these front-end applications. As we're just running these front-end applications locally and not all the rest, this means it's much quicker to start up. You no longer have to wait those several minutes for all the containers to boot up. All it takes now is as long as it takes for your local developer machine to start up that head application. Another extra benefit here is it actually makes it really easy for you to debug any production issues you might run into. All you have to do running this way is to connect your locally running head application to your production endpoint for your production environment, and you can run locally with live data. something that was much more difficult to do when you're mocking all those application instances locally. Okay, so I think it's time I showed you just how quickly you can stand up a developer machine from scratch when working Fed first. Okay, so in this demo, we're going to simulate a new developer coming on board to join an existing team building out a new site. In this case, we have a project and an environment already provisioned for us, but I need to set up my local developer machine to start working against. So we can see here we have our XM Cloud Fed First development project, and we have a testing environment here all ready for us to go. If we take a look at our Sites tab here, we can see one of our sites has been configured, and we're just going to be using the out-of-the-box skate park for this example. To be able to work locally, the first thing I need to do is to clone this repository down to my local developer machine. To do that, we're going to hop over to GitHub first. I'm going to open up the repository, and we'll clone this repo down to my local dev machine. We could do this using the simple git clone command and the SSH path that was copied from the GitHub. Once we have it cloned down, we can move into the repository, and then we'll open it in VS Code. Once we have it open here, it's really easy to connect this repository and the applications in here to my XM Cloud preview environment. To do that, we're going to hop back to the browser, and we'll go over to the developer settings for my environment. And we're going to copy these developer settings, which is going to tell my local application how to connect through to the preview instance of my environment. We only have one site configured currently, but if you had multiple, you could use the drop down here to choose the site you wanted to connect to. We're going to choose Skatepark, and then we'll use this copy command. After that, we can hop back to VS Code. Once in here, we're going to go and create a .env.local file. And this is where we're going to paste those values in. Save the values. We'll bring up our local terminal. We're just going to CD into that head apps application and into the Next.js starter site. Once in here, we're going to run npm i and npm run start connected. That's two separate npm commands combined into one. The first one is going to go and install all of the packages needed to run this site locally. And the second one is then going to go and actually run the site on my developer machine, connected through to that XM Cloud preview environment endpoint. Now, this is the first time I'm running this, so it's going to take a little bit to install all of those packages, but subsequent runs will be much quicker because they're all cached onto my local development instance, making the future runs of the application much faster. If you look at the output at the bottom there, you can see it only took 11.9 seconds to actually run this application locally. Now, I can hop back to my browser, and we'll go to localhost 3000 to run the app locally, connecting through to my preview endpoint. And here we have it, the Skatepark sample site running on my local developer machine, connecting through to the XM Cloud itself to pull its data down. As I mentioned before though, one of the benefits of this approach is that we can actually now use things like pages natively connecting down to my local dev instance. If I hop back to the deploy app, we're going to use this to open the dashboard for this site itself. What I can do now is to load up the Skatepark site in Pages. And we recently released a new feature called metadata editing. What that allows you to do is tell Pages to, instead of using the inbuilt editing host that it deploys, to connect directly to your local developer instance. That's really powerful because it means any changes I make locally while I'm building are instantly reflected in Pages, so I can test everything, make sure I'm happy before I commit and push in the change. It's super easy to do as well. All you need to do is use the drop-down, change from the default editing host over to localhost. We'll give it the URL to connect to, making sure we remember the port. We hit save, and that's now going to change over and connect to my localhost instance instead. So any changes I now make on my local instance will be instantly reflected here, allowing me to test them in Pages straight away. I'm sure you can see as well, this is such a much faster way of getting developers onboarded, have their local dev instance set up, and being productive way faster than when having to work with the previous Docker-based approach. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to follow the Discover Sitecore YouTube channel for future videos.